An aging janitor refused a $10,000 bribe, passing a secret test that made him CEO of the company. No one knew this about Harold Mendez as he pushed his cleaning cart down the fluorescent-lit hallway of Bellwater Industries on a Tuesday evening in late November, his weathered hands gripping the metal handle with the same quiet determination that had carried him through 63 years of life. The building had emptied hours ago, executives and assistants flowing out into the crisp autumn air, while Harold moved in the opposite direction, a solitary figure swimming upstream against the current of the corporate world. His reflection ghosted along the glass-walled offices, a slight man with salt and pepper hair and shoulders that curved slightly forward, as if perpetually bracing against an invisible weight. He paused at the office of the CEO, Mr. Bellwater himself, and extracted his ring of keys with practiced efficiency. Only the janitors and security guards held such intimate access to the company's inner sanctums. Only they saw the empire when it was vulnerable, when its power suits were hung in closets and its secrets lay scattered across desks. "Evening, sir," Harold whispered to the empty chair, a ritual he'd maintained for 15 years. Speaking to the absent executives helped him feel less alone during these night shifts, less invisible. The office still smelled faintly of Mr. Bellwater's expensive cologne, sandalwood, and something citrusy that Harold couldn't name. He emptied the trash bin with care, finding the usual crumpled papers and occasional coffee cup. Tonight, however, there was something else. A photograph, torn in half. Harold paused, tilting his head at the unexpected discovery. It was Mr. Bellwater with his arm around a younger man who'd been ripped away, leaving only an arm and shoulder in the frame. Even in the fragment that remained, Harold could see the tightness in the CEO's smile. Harold hesitated, then gently placed the photograph on the corner of the mahogany desk. Not in the trash where he'd found it, but where its owner might reconsider its fate. He never presumed to judge the small acts of emotion he witnessed in these late hours. The angry scribbles on legal pads, the damp tissues, the framed family photos turned face down. These were human moments in an inhuman environment, and Harold treated them with the reverence they deserved. His apartment waited for him across town, a single bedroom in a building that had seen better days, with windows that rattled when the trains passed and pipes that sang and groaned through the night. 15 years at Bellwater Industries, and still he lived paycheck to paycheck, his salary barely covering rent, utilities, and the medications that kept his heart beating steadily enough to push that cart 5 nights a week. The photograph lingered in his mind as he rode the bus home, his body swaying with the vehicle's movements, too tired to resist. His wife, Elena, would have known what to do with such a find. "Everyone has a story," she would say, and most of those stories are about love or its absence. But Elena had been gone for 3 years now, her warmth and wisdom replaced by an apartment that never quite lost its chill, no matter how high he set the thermostat. The next morning, Harold woke to the pinging of rain against his window and the muffled sound of his neighbor's television through the thin walls. His bones ached more than usual. A storm was coming, the kind that settled into joints and reminded them of their age. With careful movements, he prepared his breakfast: 1 egg, toast, and the bitter coffee that helped him shake off sleep. On his small kitchen table lay the overdue notice from the hospital, $8,243.75 for the cardiac procedure that had saved his life 3 months ago. The payment plan they'd offered would stretch into his 70s. Harold sighed, folding the paper and tucking it beneath his ancient toaster where he wouldn't have to see it while he ate. Wednesday was his day off, but his pension from his first career as a high school mathematics teacher barely covered groceries. He'd picked up a second job at Martinez Hardware, where the owner, Felix, paid him cash to organize inventory and help the occasional customer find the right screw or nail. "The rain is keeping everyone away," Felix commented as Harold arranged a display of flashlights. "You should go home, save your energy." "I need the hours," Harold replied, not meeting his friend's eyes. Felix leaned against the counter. "Your heart giving you trouble again?" "The heart is fine," Harold said, tapping his chest with a hollow sound. "It's the bills that are killing me." Felix chuckled without humor. "Ain't that the truth?" He hesitated, then added, "My cousin works at Mercy Hospital. In billing. Maybe she could help with your situation." Harold straightened, dignity rising in his posture. "I appreciate the thought, but I'll manage." "Stubborn old teacher," Felix muttered, but his eyes were kind. "At least take some soup home. Maria made too much again." By the time Harold returned to Bellwater Industries on Thursday evening, the storm had fully arrived. Rain lashed against the towering windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Nature's percussion accompanying the squeak of his cartwheels on polished floors. The security guard Terrence greeted him with a nod. "Rough one out there, mister. Indashemi. You walked from the bus stop in this?" Harold shrugged, water dripping from his ancient raincoat. "It's just water. Forecast says it'll keep up all night. Flash flood warnings for the lower areas." Terrence eyed him with concern. "You live down by Riverfront, don't you?" 14th floor, Harold replied. "The building might leak, but not that high up." He began his rounds, working methodically from the ground floor upward. The storm's energy seemed to have seeped into the building. Papers rustled in the air conditioning drafts. Lights flickered occasionally with distant lightning. By the time he reached the executive floor, a strange tension had settled between his shoulder blades. The CEO's office light was on. Harold paused, cart halted mid-push. "Mr. Bellwater rarely worked this late, and never on Thursdays." That was his standing dinner with the board members at the club downtown. For a moment, Harold considered turning around, coming back to this floor later, but duty pushed him forward. He knocked softly on the open door. "Excuse me, sir. Should I come back?" The man at the desk wasn't Richard Bellwater. He was younger, maybe 40, with dark hair cut close at the sides and intense eyes that looked up sharply at the interruption. Harold recognized him immediately as Jackson Keller, the company's CFO, a rising star who featured prominently in company newsletters and whose name was often whispered in the break rooms with a mixture of admiration and fear. "No, come in," Keller said, gesturing with a manicured hand. "I'm using Richard's office while mine is being renovated." His gaze swept over Harold, taking in the worn uniform, the weathered face, the posture that spoke of exhaustion held at bay by sheer force of will. "You're the night janitor." "Yes, sir." "Harold Mendez." "How long have you worked here, Harold?" The question seemed oddly personal, but Harold answered anyway. 15 years this December." 15 years. Keller leaned back in the CEO's leather chair, fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. "That's loyalty in today's market." "Tell me, what did you do before Bellwater?" Harold shifted uncomfortably. "I taught high school mathematics for nearly 30 years. "A teacher?" Keller's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a career change." "The pension wasn't enough after my wife got sick." The words came out before Harold could consider them, more vulnerable than he'd intended. "I'm sorry to hear that." Keller's tone softened slightly. He glanced at his watch, then back at Harold with a new intensity. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Mendez." Harold waited, uncertain. "I noticed you have access to all the offices here, including the secure server room on the 6th floor. Harold nodded cautiously. "For cleaning purposes only." "Of course." Keller opened a drawer and removed a manila envelope. "Inside this envelope is a USB drive. I need it plugged into the main server terminal for approximately 10 minutes, just long enough to run a diagnostic program. Company procedure, but IT is backlogged with the system upgrades." The envelope landed on the desk with a soft thud. Beside it, Keller placed a stack of bills. "There's $10,000 here. Cash, tax-free, for 10 minutes of your time." The air in the room seemed to thin. Harold stared at the money, more than he earned in 3 months. Enough to make a significant dent in his medical debt. Enough to fix the leak in his bathroom ceiling and replace the refrigerator that hummed alarmingly through the night. What exactly would this program do? He asked, his voice steady despite the thunder of his pulse. Keller waved dismissively. "Technical stuff. Analyzing data flow, checking for inefficiencies. Nothing that affects operations." But there was something in the man's eyes, a sharpness, a calculation, that reminded Harold of students who'd tried to cheat on his exams, believing their teacher too old or too tired to notice. "I'm afraid I can't help you, Mr. Keller." The words emerged quietly but firmly. "Excuse me? I don't have authorization to run programs on company servers." Harold kept his hands on his cart, anchoring himself against the temptation lying on the desk. Keller's smile tightened. "I'm authorizing you. I'm the CFO. With all due respect, sir, that's not how authorization works. If this is company procedure, there should be documentation, a work order, something in writing from Mr. Bellwater himself. Let me be clear." Keller's voice dropped, all pretense of warmth evaporating. "This is $10,000 in cash. For 10 minutes of work. No one would ever know." Harold thought of his leaking ceiling, of the hospital bills, of the medications he sometimes skipped to stretch his prescription. He thought of Elena, who taught 3rd grade for 35 years, and who'd always told their students that character was what you did when no one was watching. "I would know, sir." Harold met the executive's gaze. "And I believe you should leave Mr. Bellwater's office now. For a moment, the only sound was the rain lashing against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Then Keller laughed, a short, surprised sound, and began gathering the money back into the envelope. Integrity at minimum wage. Now I've seen everything. He stood straightening his expensive suit. Have a good evening, Mr. Mendez. Enjoy your, sir, cleaning. Harold waited until the elevator doors closed behind the CFO before releasing a shaky breath. His hands trembled slightly as he began his usual routine, emptying trash, wiping surfaces, vacuuming. The encounter left him unsettled, wondering if he should report it to someone. But who would believe a janitor over a CFO? By the time he reached the parking garage level hours later, the storm had intensified. Harold buttoned his thin raincoat to the neck, preparing for the dash to the bus stop, when a voice called out behind him. Mr. Mendez. A moment, please. Harold turned to find Richard Bellwater himself emerging from a sleek black car, an umbrella held by his driver, shielding him from the downpour. Sir? Harold stood straighter, surprised by the CEO's presence at this hour. I was hoping to catch you before you left. Bellwater dismissed his driver with a nod and gestured to the car. Would you join me for a moment? It's rather wet for a conversation out here. Confused but obedient, Harold slid into the leather-back seat, acutely aware of his damp clothes against the luxury interior. Bellwater followed, closing the door against the storm. I understand you had an interesting conversation with Jackson Keller tonight. Bellwater said without preamble. Harold's stomach tightened. Sir, no need for explanations. Bellwater held up a hand. The entire interaction was recorded. Standard security protocol for the executive offices. The rain drummed against the roof of the car, filling the silence as Harold processed this information. Am I being fired, sir? To his surprise, Bellwater laughed, a genuine sound that creased the corners of his eyes. Quite the opposite, Mr. Mendez. What you experienced tonight was a test, one that Jackson administered at my request, and one that, I'm pleased to say, you passed with flying colors. Harold blinked, trying to make sense of the CEO's words. A test? Indeed. Bellwater's expression grew more serious. I'm retiring at the end of the year. The board and I have been evaluating potential successors for months, but I've been dissatisfied with the candidates. Brilliant minds, certainly, but lacking something essential. He reached into his suit jacket and removed a familiar photograph, the same one Harold had rescued from the trash days earlier. It was whole now, the torn half reattached. The image showed Bellwater with his arm around Jackson Keller. My protege, Bellwater explained, gazing at the photo. Brilliant with numbers, visionary with strategy. The natural choice for succession. His finger traced the line where the photograph had been torn. But character, Mr. Mendez, true character, isn't revealed in boardrooms or quarterly reports. It's revealed in moments of temptation when no one is watching. Or when only a night janitor is watching. Sir, I don't understand what this has to do with me. Bellwater turned in his seat to face Harold directly. For 15 years, you've moved invisibly through our company. You've seen executives at their worst and their best. You've witnessed confidential meetings through glass walls, overheard strategies discussed in late-night sessions. You've had access to our most sensitive information. I would never... Precisely. Bellwater smiled. You would never. That's exactly the point. You hold degrees in mathematics and education. You manage budgets for your department during your teaching career. You understand people and numbers. The two things this business is built on. Outside, lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the garage in stark white light. I've been watching you, Mr. Mendez, learning about you, your work ethic, your integrity, your intelligence, the respect you show to everyone from the security guards to the board members. And tonight confirmed what I already suspected. Bellwater leaned forward. I want you to be the next CEO of Bellwater Industries. The words hung in the air, so impossible that Harold nearly laughed. But the CEO's expression remained serious, expectant. That's absurd, Harold finally managed. I'm a janitor. Currently, yes. But before that, you were an educator, a leader, a man who shaped young minds for 3 decades. You understand more about this company than most of the executives who've worked here for years. Bellwater's voice grew passionate. This company was founded on innovation and integrity. Somewhere along the way, we've maintained the former while losing sight of the latter. Harold shook his head, overwhelmed. The board would never accept this. The board granted me full authority to name my successor, with their oversight, of course. There will be conditions, training, mentorship, a transition period, But the position is yours if you want it. Why me? Harold asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. Why not someone qualified, someone younger? Bellwater's expression softened. When I was a young man starting this company, a janitor at my first office building caught me trying to dump chemicals illegally to save disposal costs. He refused to look the other way, even when I offered him money. He reported me, cost me a significant fine, and taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. He paused. That janitor was my father. The revelation settled between them as the storm continued its assault outside. Take some time to consider the offer, Bellwater said, reaching for the door handle. We can discuss details next week. For now, my driver will take you home. This weather is no condition for waiting at bus stops. As the car pulled away from Bellwater Industries, Harold sat in stunned silence, watching raindrops race across the window, like all the possibilities suddenly rushing toward him. At 63, when most men were contemplating retirement, he was being offered a rebirth. The weekend passed in a blur of disbelief and consideration. Harold's apartment, which had always felt too small, now seemed cavernous as he paced its confines, trying to make sense of Bellwater's offer. He called his daughter in California, their weekly ritual, but couldn't bring himself to mention the proposition. It sounded too fantastical, too unlikely to be believed. On Sunday afternoon, he visited Elena's grave, bringing fresh flowers despite the continuing drizzle. The cemetery was empty, visitors deterred by the weather, giving Harold the privacy to speak aloud to the polished stone that marked his wife's resting place. They want me to run the company, Ellie, he said, arranging the flowers in the permanent vase. Me, the night janitor. He chuckled, the sound quickly swept away by the wind. You always said I was meant for more than emptying trash cans, that I still had so much to give. A memory surfaced. Elena in her hospital bed, frail but eyes still bright with the determination that had defined her, gripping his hand and making him promise not to disappear after she was gone. The world still needs your kindness, Harold, she'd insisted. Don't you dare hide it away. Monday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the storm finally exhausted. Harold dressed with particular care in his best shirt and only tie before heading to Bellwater Industries, hours before his usual shift. The receptionist in the main lobby, Diane, whose desk he'd dusted hundreds of times, didn't recognize him at first without his uniform. Mr. Mendez, is everything all right? Yes, thank you. Mr. Bellwater is expecting me. Her surprise was evident as she made the call, but moments later Harold was riding the executive elevator to the top floor, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force that would have concerned his cardiologist. Richard Bellwater greeted him with a handshake and ushered him into a conference room where several board members waited. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to skepticism as introductions were made. Gentlemen, ladies, this is Harold Mendez, Bellwater announced. The man I believe should be our next CEO. What followed was 3 hours of the most intensive conversation of Harold's life. They questioned his background, his understanding of the business, his vision for the company's future. Harold answered honestly, drawing on 15 years of observations and his own experiences as both teacher and service worker. I may not know the intricacies of your financial models, he told them at one point, but I know that your customer service department is understaffed and overwhelmed. I know that your environmental compliance team is passionate but underfunded. I know that your middle managers are afraid to bring problems to upper management, so issues fester until they become crises. And how do you know all this? Asked a board member with silver hair and a doubtful expression. Because people talk when they think no one is listening, Harold replied simply. And janitors are very good at being invisible. By early afternoon, the tone in the room had shifted. The skepticism hadn't vanished, but it had been joined by a reluctant interest, a willingness to consider Bellwater's unusual proposition. We'll need time to discuss this further, the board chair said finally. But Mr. Mendez, I must say you've given us much to consider. As the meeting adjourned, Bellwater walked Harold to the elevator, a hand on his shoulder. You've impressed them, he said quietly, just as I knew you would. It still doesn't feel real, Harold admitted. It will. Bellwater pressed the call button. The transition won't happen overnight. There's much for you to learn, systems to understand, relationships to build. But we'll start immediately. And if I fail, Bellwater, consider this. What did you tell your students when they were afraid to try something difficult? The elevator arrived with a soft chime, but Harold made no move to enter it. I told them that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. A smile tugged at his lips. And I told them to show their work even if the answer was wrong. Solid advice for business as well. The CEO extended his hand once more. So, Mr. Mendez, do we have an agreement? Harold thought of the hospital bills on his kitchen table, of the apartment with its leaking ceiling, of the decades spent serving others, first students, then executives. He thought of Elena, who had always believed in second chances and unexpected blessings. Yes, he said, clasping Bellwater's hand firmly. We do. The transformation began the very next day. Harold was provided an office on the executive floor, not the CEO's yet, but a space of his own with a window overlooking the city. His janitor's uniform was replaced by suits tailored to his slight frame, his bus pass exchanged for a company car and driver. The news spread through Bellwater Industries like wildfire, reactions ranging from disbelief to amusement to outrage. Harold felt the stares as he walked the hallways, heard the whispers that followed him into elevators and conference rooms. Jackson Keller, who had offered the bribe, submitted his resignation the day after the announcement, his ambitions crushed by a man who had once emptied his trash. The learning curve was steep. Harold spent hours with department heads learning the minutiae of operations he had only glimpsed from the outside. He studied financial reports late into the night, applied his mathematical background to understanding market trends and profit margins. Bellwater himself served as mentor, guiding Harold through the labyrinth of corporate leadership with patience and occasional tough love. "You're too nice," the CEO admonished after watching Harold struggle through a difficult meeting. "Being kind doesn't mean being a pushover. These people need to respect you, not just like you." "They think I'm a joke," Harold admitted, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. "The janitor playing dress-up." "Then stop acting like you don't belong here." Bellwater's voice was firm but not unkind. "You earned this position through character and intelligence, two things in shorter supply than you might think in corporate America. Own your story, Harold. It's your greatest strength." Slowly, painfully, Harold found his footing. He made mistakes, approving a marketing campaign that flopped, mishandling a difficult client relationship, but he also discovered an unexpected talent for seeing connections others missed and identifying inefficiencies that had been accepted as standard for years. 4 months into his training, he proposed a comprehensive reorganization of the customer service department, drawing on his observations as a janitor and his experience managing classroom dynamics as a teacher. "The current system rewards speed over resolution," he explained to the board, standing confidently at the head of the conference table where he'd once vacuumed crumbs and wiped coffee rings. "We're measuring the wrong metrics and incentivizing the wrong behaviors." His plan was approved, implemented, and within weeks showed measurable improvements in customer satisfaction and employee retention. It was Harold's first major victory, a tangible demonstration of the value his unusual perspective brought to the company. As winter thawed into spring, Harold's presence in the executive suite became less of a curiosity and more of a fixture. The whispers diminished, replaced by grudging respect, and from some quarters, genuine admiration. Diane from reception, who had once barely noticed him during his night shifts, now greeted him warmly each morning. "Mr. Mendez, there's someone waiting to see you," she announced one Tuesday in April. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he was quite insistent." Harold stepped into the lobby to find Terrence, the security guard who had expressed concern about the flood warnings months earlier. "Mr. Indash," Terrence said, standing straighter in his uniform. "Sorry to bother you, sir." "Never a bother, Terrence. What can I do for you?" The security guard hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "I was wondering about that college program you mentioned last year, the one for adult learners. You said the company had a tuition reimbursement policy that wasn't being utilized." Harold smiled, remembering their late-night conversations about Terrence's dreams of becoming an engineer. "I did say that, didn't I? Come upstairs, let's talk about it." By the time Richard Bellwater's retirement date arrived in early summer, the announcement of Harold Mendez as his successor no longer shocked the business community. The story had been carefully crafted and shared. The former educator who had joined Bellwater Industries in a maintenance role and demonstrated such exceptional insight and integrity that he had risen to the company's highest position. What remained private was the test, the bribe, the moment of choice in a storm-lashed office when Harold had chosen principle over personal gain, not knowing his decision was being weighed and measured. The transition ceremony was held in the company's largest conference center. Harold stood beside Bellwater at the podium, looking out at hundreds of employees, many of whom he had silently served for years, emptying their trash and cleaning their spaces without recognition. Leadership comes in many forms. Bellwater said in his farewell address. Sometimes it wears expensive suits and sits in corner offices. Sometimes it pushes a cleaning cart through empty hallways at midnight, maintaining standards when no one is watching. He turned to Harold with genuine respect in his eyes. This company was built on innovation, but it will thrive on integrity. I can think of no better hands to leave it in than those of Harold Mendez. As applause filled the room, Harold stepped to the microphone, his heart full. The journey from that rainy night to this moment had transformed more than his employment status. It had awakened parts of himself that had been dormant for years, since Elena's illness had narrowed his world to survival and solitude. Thank you, he began, his voice steady and clear. 15 years ago, I joined this company with a mop and a bucket, grateful for steady work during a difficult time. I never imagined standing here today. He scanned the faces before him, executives in business attire, administrative staff, maintenance workers in uniforms like the one he had worn for so long. Many of you knew me only as the night janitor. If you noticed me at all, that's not a criticism. It's the nature of certain roles to become invisible, the work essential but unseen. What I learned in that invisibility was invaluable. I saw this company not through strategy meetings or quarterly reports, but through the everyday actions of its people, who stayed late to finish projects, who treated maintenance staff with respect, who cut corners when they thought no one was looking. Harold paused, thinking of Elena and what she would make of this moment. My late wife was a teacher like I was. She used to tell our students that true character isn't what you do for applause. It's what you do in empty rooms when no one is watching. As your CEO, I will prioritize not just what we achieve, but how we achieve it. Not just the bottom line, but the human beings who make that bottom line possible. He gestured to the maintenance staff standing against the back wall. To the invisible workers who keep this company running, the cleaners, security personnel, maintenance teams, I see you. I was you, and I will not forget. That evening, after the celebration had ended and the conference center had emptied, Harold lingered alone on the executive floor. He walked slowly past the office that was now his, with its mahogany desk and leather chair, its view of the city skyline now glittering with lights as dusk deepened into night. On impulse, he took the elevator down to the maintenance department in the basement level. The night cleaning crew was preparing for their shift, loading carts with supplies, checking their assignment sheets. They fell silent as he entered, surprise registering on their faces at the sight of the new CEO in their domain. "Don't let me interrupt," Harold said, moving toward the supply closet. "I just came to get something." He located his old cart, recognizable by the small dent on one side where he'd bumped it against a door frame years ago. He ran his hand along its metal handle, feeling the worn grip where his palms had rested night after night. "May I?" he asked the bewildered supervisor, who nodded quickly. Harold grasped the cart and pushed it forward, feeling its familiar weight, hearing the slight squeak of the front left wheel that maintenance had never quite fixed. He navigated it through the narrow doorway with the practiced ease of muscle memory, then turned to the night crew who watched in confused silence. "Perfect steering," he said with a smile, patting the cart affectionately before stepping away. "Take good care of her." As he rode the elevator back to the lobby, Harold felt a profound sense of completion. The cart belonged to his past now, but it would remain a part of his story, the tool that had carried him through 15 years of invisible service, that had been present on the night when his integrity was secretly tested, that had supported him as he pushed through empty hallways, unseen but essential. Outside, summer stars punctuated the dark sky above the city, visible despite the urban glow. Harold thought of Elena, who had loved stargazing, who had taught him that light travels millions of years before reaching Earth, how what we see in the present was actually born in the distant past. Like that starlight, the seeds of this moment had been planted long ago, in classrooms where he'd taught young minds about more than just equations, in hospital rooms where he'd promised Elena to keep his heart open to possibility, in late-night offices where he'd chosen right over easy. As his driver pulled up to the curb, Harold Mendez straightened his shoulders and stepped forward into his new role. No longer invisible, no longer just passing through, but fully present and prepared to lead with the same quiet integrity that had guided him all along. From janitor to CEO, his transformation was remarkable, not because he had changed who he was, but because the world had finally recognized the value of who he had always been.